Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Greg Simpson, and this is our daily devotional. We are in the New Testament again this morning, and we're going to read from the book of Matthew 12:38 to 42. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees said to him, "Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you." But he answered them, "An evil and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so for 3 days and 3 nights the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth. The people of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, because they repented at the proclamation of Jonah, and see, something greater than Jonah is here. The Queen of the South will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to listen to the wisdom of Solomon, and see, something greater than Solomon is here." I think it's wonderful when we find these threads that weave themselves between our day-to-day devotions. Now, there's no accident to that. I'm choosing scriptures that are coming from the Revised Common Lectionary, and this is something that has been around for 40 or 50 years. Very, very wise people manage it. And this just makes sure that as we go, we are able to get through the entire Bible in the course of 3 years. And so they've done a lot of work to make sure that there are some thematic similarities that kind of connect together. So I'm not surprised when it happens, but it's really, really neat because there's so many topics that we can draw from just about any one of the scriptures. And each day there are 3 or 4 given scriptures that I could have chosen from. So I'll admit to you that I don't do a lot of long-term planning. I kind of know which scriptures are going to read which day, but I kind of let each day be its own thing. Which is why it's beautiful when the Spirit is at work and we see these themes that draw through them. Only a few days ago, we were talking about testing God and how Gideon was testing God. And in that environment, in that circumstance, that was an encouragement to be open-minded about our relationship with our faith. And then we have this conversation about Jonah from yesterday and running from God's goals. And then today, we've got the Pharisees testing Jesus. And his reaction is quite different. And so we need to hold this in a bit of context. We remember that Jesus had quite a few negative things to say about the religion of the time. And so I'm going to be massively paraphrasing here. And if I do this wrong, go and take a good look through and please correct me on this. But in general, when Jesus looked at the work that was going on in the temple and how the culture of the religious experience of the day had become something that was about people who were using religion to further their own careers, to build their own power. There's the relationship between the temple and the Roman occupiers, where the Romans had some control over the Sanhedrin, which is sort of the ruling body of the political side of the religious spectrum. And then there were even some monetary concerns, where the idea of how you bought and paid for the sacrifices that were required by the laws of the religion, that those things had become oppressive, where there were some people who were making all the money and gaining all the power, while the people at the bottom of society were kept at the bottom of society. In fact, they were pushed out in some cases. Unfortunately, that sounds a bit like some of the societies we live in today, doesn't it? And do you ever get really frustrated with some of the social structures and the power structures, whether they be corporations, or maybe they are the organizations you belong to, or maybe it's the politics of the place where you live? I'm not sure, but what Jesus was standing up against, the things that really made him angry, the few times that we see him being very pointed and being very angry, it was around a religion that had become something that was very, very far from what even the Hebrew Testament describes it should be. This is meant to be a group of people who care for the people around them, who care for those who need care. And there are lots of religious rules that go with it, but folks like the Pharisees, who he's speaking with here, have made the rules more important than the humans. maybe in similar ways where we have made the money more important than the humans. And we know that straight up. There are 2 or 3 different times that Jesus comes into conflict with the Pharisees, because one time he healed on the Sabbath day. The rule was you do no work on the Sabbath. But he healed a guy. He made the guy healthy. Like, why would it be that the rule of don't work on the Sabbath would be more important than taking care of a human? So that kind of helps us to frame why Jesus is pushing back so vehemently in this circumstance. And I want to look at the 2 different examples he gives. He gives the people of Nineveh and the Queen of the South. So that's Queen Sheba, and we know her from stories in 1st and 2nd Samuel, where she went to visit Solomon, which Jesus references here. He's taking people who, A, don't know the cultures and aren't part of the religion, yet somehow, without being like the in crowd, they still do what is right in the way that he's framing this. For example, the Ninevites, a group of people who were horrible, awful, militant. They wiped out the entire northern kingdom of Israel. This was a bad news group of people. And in the story of Jonah, we have them coming to their senses and connecting with God and listening to the wisdom of God and becoming a loving people. So Jesus is holding them up as an example for the Pharisees, saying, you don't get it. You're so wrapped up in all your laws and your rules and the power structures and the ways that you are supporting yourself and helping you get by. You miss out on the fact that the folks that we all have agreed are awful, militant people. They do better than you when they come to their senses, when they see the wisdom of Jonah, when they see God's love. And then the same thing, the Queen of Sheba, she was an outsider. She was definitely not a member of the Israelite people or the ancient Hebrews in the time when Solomon was around. And she came to Solomon because of his wisdom. She came with gifts and she came with all sorts of stuff because she wanted to learn. She came with an open mind. It wasn't like, oh, well, I have to do this because the religion tells me. She's wanting to better herself. And because she's a queen, her people will be bettered by it as well. If she can learn from Solomon's wisdom, especially the wisdom that was granted to Solomon from God, the wisdom that says, care for all humans. Can you imagine how great that was for the area when she went back and she cared for her people because of what she learned from Solomon? And yet these Pharisees, not really caring for the people around them. And that's what Jesus was calling out. And that is a pretty straightforward, direct message at us today. We've got to deal with the organizations, the political structures, the systems in our world that hold down people who are already oppressed, to keep the poor poor and make the rich richer. I'm not sure if you've spent much time researching sort of the wealth gap, whether it's in Western society or sort of like the wealth gap across the entire world. I live in Canada, and so we are, of course, right next to the United States, and the United States has a huge amount of wealth. And if we name off the 10 wealthiest humans or families on the planet, I think 7 of those 10 make the United States their primary residence. And so there's no question that wealth gap centers around the United States. There's definitely some oil money as well, and there's some very, very wealthy people in the United Kingdom. And part of this is a bit of an argument because something like the Catholic Church as an organization, that wealth so far outstrips any of these other conversations. But that's an important part of this. We are in these spaces, in these times, in these systems that are now old. We've built them to be what they are. We're all complicit in this action. And it's time for us to turn this around and to care for the people, to listen to Jonah's message to the Ninevites saying, you once were the people that would kill and destroy for your own benefit. You need to be the people who come back to God and love and care for everyone. Now, that just sounds like a straight up command, and it is. Jesus was pretty clear about that. But let's look at this as a slightly different direction. I love to frame it in a what if, or can you imagine? Can you imagine what our world would look like if people actually loved each other more than they loved themselves? If We were able to put to rest the selfishness that forces people to put their own power and prestige and wealth ahead of whoever else they have to step on to get there. And the sort of thing that blinds us to the fact that the Western world is entirely propped up by underpaid workers all over the rest of the world. I am part of that. I know that being white and English speaking and educated and living in Canada and like this long list and male and all of that, that puts me at the tip of the pyramid of my part of society is using others. And Jesus is pointing his finger directly at me and the society that I'm part of, saying, even the Ninevites got their heads around this better than you did. The people who were always the outsiders. Friends, we've got to change. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen by accident. It has to be intentional. We need to take steps to do a way, way better job of caring for people who aren't being cared for and calling out the people whose selfishness and hoarding is leading to some of the significant struggles that we see in social upset in this world. That's what Jesus is saying to you and I as he speaks to the Pharisees. Let us pray. God, sometimes we don't really want to hear these messages. We don't want to hear that it's up to us to start by changing our own minds and start by setting aside our own selfishness so that we can do a better job of caring for others. Recognizing that some of us who are already on the wealthy and luxurious side of things are going to have to be willing to give some things up so that others can be cared for. We know that the balance of power is absurd and obscene in this world right now. And we know that not only is that hurting the other humans on this planet, but it's hurting the planet itself. So God, we hear you. Jesus, we see you. And we take this to heart. And we know that we can't do this by our own power. Continue to encourage, continue to show us the way, continue to convict our hearts that we might take bold and brave steps. Although, like Jonah, we might be tempted to run the opposite direction. Rather, like Jesus, let's stand in the face of oppression, point it out, speak truth to power, and make changes in this world. For the things that he did 2,000 years ago are still having positive, wonderful ripples in our world today. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know sometimes we lean into the social justice side of things a little bit, but the more I read the Bible, the more convicted I am that that is exactly what we need to be doing and who we need to be. So let's actually fight for people who cannot fight for themselves. Let's speak out or raise up the voices that are being silenced, and let's call out power. And in the process, look inside ourselves and see where and when and how we are part of the problem and what we can do in our corner of the world to make things a little bit better. I want to thank you so much for joining me this morning. If you've missed any previous daily devotions, you can click over there. There's a playlist of them, or you can subscribe, click the little bell. YouTube will let you know when I upload the next video, which will be tomorrow morning. I look forward to seeing you then. I love you all. Bye for now.